Before we begin this story, if you enjoy chilling tales of history that whisper through the silence of forgotten halls, take a moment to subscribe. Your support helps us uncover the darker corners of the past, where truth and legend quietly intertwine. Now, let us step into the dying twilight of a king's reign. It was winter. The halls of Whitehall Palace echoed faintly with the shuffle of servants and the muffled cough of a dying monarch. King Henry, once a figure of unstoppable power, once the thunder of England, was now confined to a bed that smelled faintly of decay and herbs. His breath came heavy, like air drawn through water, and his skin had grown pale, stretched thin across the swollen weight of his body. The court physicians whispered of infection, of a wound that refused to heal, a leg that had become a festering monument to his sins. Around him, the flicker of candlelight revealed a strange kingdom of silence. No one dared to speak too loudly. Even his closest advisors, men who once trembled before his anger, now spoke only in soft tones, as though afraid the sound itself might summon his wrath one last time. The once mighty king had become a ghost in his own palace, haunted by the echoes of his deeds, by the names of those who had died because of him. Catherine Howard, and Bullen, Thomas More, Cromwell. The faces of the past swam in his fevered mind like specters in the smoke. Sometimes he called out to them in the night, half asleep, half delirious, whispering apologies that never reached living ears. Servants would find him murmuring to the shadows, begging forgiveness from those long dead. Yet forgiveness never came. Only the slow ticking of the clock and the faint creak of the floorboards answered his prayers. Outside, snow drifted against the palace windows. The Thames had begun to freeze. England itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting. The courtiers who still remained moved carefully, quietly, like actors trapped in the final act of a tragedy that could not be rewritten. Letters were prepared, though none knew to whom. Each man thought only of survival, of what might happen when the throne finally fell silent. Henry's attendants could smell the corruption spreading through his body. The king's leg had burst once more, leaking foul blood and pus, yet he refused to admit weakness. Even in agony, he demanded music. The sound of a lute, faint and trembling, filled the air as he stared into the dark, his eyes wide with something that looked like fear. He saw visions, they said. He saw himself younger, riding across the fields of England, his banners snapping in the wind, his enemies trembling before him. He saw his first love, the woman he had once believed chosen by God. He saw his children, Mary, Elizabeth, Edward, each a reflection of his legacy, each a reminder of how far his empire had fallen from peace. And then he would wake, sweating, muttering about betrayal and ghosts, clutching at the crucifix that lay heavy on his chest. The palace staff began to whisper that the king was cursed, that the souls of the dead had come to claim him. His confessor tried to speak of mercy, of redemption, but Henry's mind wandered. He spoke instead of conquest, of glory, of France and gold and the taste of power. He could not stop reaching backward, to the moments when he was still feared, still obeyed, still alive in the eyes of history. Days blurred into nights. The candles burned low. The king's pulse grew faint. Yet he did not die. He lingered, as if clinging to life out of sheer defiance. Every dawn found him weaker, yet still breathing, his mind drifting between past and present. The courtiers grew pale and restless. None wished to be near him, but none dared to leave. To abandon the king before his last breath was to risk everything. The stench in his chambers grew unbearable. They covered it with lavender and incense, but still it seeped through the tapestries, through the stone, through the memory of the place itself. Even after his body would finally give way, that smell would linger, like a warning from the past. He began to dream of the river. In those dreams, he walked along its frozen banks, dressed not as a king, but as a boy. The snow fell quietly. The world was still. He could hear the distant bells of London, the faint laughter of a life that had never been his. And when he turned, he saw the faces again. Those he had loved, those he had destroyed, all standing together on the far shore, watching him, waiting. He tried to speak, but his voice was gone. He tried to cross the ice, but each step cracked beneath him. And then the dream would end, and he would wake with tears on his cheeks, whispering a single word no one could understand. The courtiers began to count the hours. Priests stood ready. Messengers waited with sealed letters. Yet still, the king's heart refused to stop. It was as if the throne itself would not let him go. Outside, the first thaw began. Water trickled through the frozen gutters. Spring was coming, but not for him. Inside that room, time no longer moved. It had become a loop, a long, slow circle of pain and memory, regret and silence. And as the light faded once more, the king whispered to the darkness, "I am still here." And the darkness whispered back, softly, almost kindly, "Not for long." Yet the story never truly ends. For even after his death, his shadow lingered in the walls of the palace, in the laws he wrote, in the bloodline he shaped. His name carried the weight of centuries. His sins echoed across generations. And somewhere, in the quiet corners of England's memory, the ghost of King Henry still walks, alone, restless, forever haunted by the empire he built and the souls it cost him. The story continues, endlessly, in every corridor of power, in every crown that shines a little too brightly. Because every king, no matter how mighty, must one day face the darkness that waits in the final hours. And as we listen to the echo of his breath, fading into silence, we remember that power always leaves a shadow, and that history, like his conscience, never sleeps. When the final breath left his chest, no one dared to speak. The room was still. A candle flickered, then went out. The silence felt heavier than the stone of the palace walls. Outside, the first birds of morning sang, unaware that the man who had ruled over them with iron and fear had finally fallen into the silence he had so long resisted. The attendants moved slowly, as though afraid that any sudden motion might wake him. They covered his face, whispered prayers, and backed away. His body was no longer a king. It was only flesh, swollen and cold, destined soon for the vault beneath St. George's Chapel. Yet his presence clung to everything: the bed, the air, the faces of those who had served him. It was as though even death could not strip away the weight of his name. Word spread through the palace like a ghostly wind. Servants stopped mid-step. Nobles crossed themselves. Some wept, but quietly. Others smiled, but only when no one was looking. For though the tyrant was gone, his shadow remained. His laws still bound them. His choices still shaped their fates. And his children, each marked by his legacy, stood waiting for their turn beneath the crown's burden. The young Prince Edward, pale and fragile, was brought forth. He did not understand the full weight of the crown placed upon his head. To him, it was only a symbol, a golden circle too large for his small brow. The men around him, Somerset, Dudley, the ambitious few who had survived Henry's storms, bowed deeply, hiding their thoughts behind lowered eyes. For they knew that the throne of a child was a dangerous throne indeed. In the dim corridors of the palace, the portraits of the dead kings stared down, unblinking. The candles beneath them burned low. The scent of Henry's sickness still lingered, mixed with incense, forming a haze that refused to lift. Servants whispered that at night they could still hear footsteps in the king's old chamber, a slow, dragging sound, like the echo of a body too heavy for its own spirit. Outside, England moved on. Bells tolled for morning. Black cloth hung from the windows of London. The people gathered in silence, not sure whether to grieve or to breathe freely again. Some remembered the king as a great ruler who had defied Rome and made England its own. Others remembered the heads that fell, the screams from the tower, the endless taxes, the wars. But the dead do not answer questions, and the living do not agree on memory. Days turned into weeks. The great coffin was carried through the streets, followed by nobles in black and commoners who bowed without expression. Beneath the lid lay a man who had once shaken the world, now reduced to dust and ceremony. They said that as his coffin passed through Sion Abbey, strange sounds were heard, like moaning, like laughter, like something clawing at the wood. Some said it was the king's soul, trapped between heaven and hell, unwilling to surrender either. Others said it was only the wind, but the stories grew, whispered from town to town, until his funeral became less an ending than another haunting. In the dark vault at Windsor, they sealed him beside Jane Seymour, the wife he had loved most, or perhaps the one who had caused him the least pain. Yet even there, in the silence of the tomb, peace eluded him. Centuries later, when the vault was opened, they said the air inside was thick and foul, as though time itself had refused to forgive what it held. Above the ground, the world changed. Edward grew into a pale echo of his father's ambition. His reign was short, frail, overshadowed by sickness and by the men who ruled in his name. The boy king would die before his 15th year, his last breaths thin and uncertain. And so, once more, the crown passed to blood, first to Mary, then to Elizabeth. Each carried Henry's fire within them, each shaped by his storm. Mary, the daughter of the woman Henry had cast aside, tried to restore what he had broken. Her reign burned with zeal, with pain, with the memory of her mother's tears. The fires of Smithfield blazed, and the screams of the condemned rose once again into the English sky. It was as if the sins of the father had been reborn in the heart of his child. Then came Elizabeth, brilliant, cautious, alone. She walked the halls her father once ruled, her steps echoing beneath the same ceilings that had heard his rage. She spoke of peace, of wisdom, of a new England. Yet even she could not escape his shadow. It was in her eyes when she looked upon her crown. It was in her silence when she remembered the mother she never knew. And through all those years, through all those thrones and coronations and deaths, the memory of Henry never faded. His ghost lived in the corridors of Westminster, in the river fog of London, in the whispers of scholars and the dreams of kings. Some said they could feel his presence on cold nights, standing beside the fire, watching, always watching. Time moved on. Empires rose and fell. The language changed, the people changed, but the story of the great and terrible king endured. Historians argued, poets wept, painters tried to capture his face. Yet none could truly show what he had become in those final days. The man beneath the crown, the fear behind the eyes, the slow, awful unraveling of a life once touched by divine power. And so, his story never truly ends. It lingers in the walls of history itself, like the faint smell of smoke long after the fire has died. Each time a ruler tastes absolute power, his name returns, whispering from the grave. Each time a law is written in pride or vengeance, his shadow stretches across the page. The past is never gone. It only sleeps, waiting for the world to listen again. And somewhere, in the deep quiet between centuries, the voice of King Henry still murmurs, half prayer, half curse, against the endless ticking of time. And the story continues. Endlessly, the candle burns lower, the night grows colder, and the echo of the king's final breath still trembles through the dark corridors of history. Years dissolved like wax beneath the flame of time. The court that once trembled at the sound of Henry's voice turned to dust, their portraits fading behind cracked varnish and yellowed frames. The palaces he built began to decay from within, their grand halls echoing with nothing but the sigh of wind through broken glass. Yet his presence never left. Even as ivy climbed the walls and rain crept through forgotten roofs, those who lingered after sunset claimed to hear footsteps pacing the corridors, heavy and deliberate. The Thames rolled on, indifferent, carrying whispers of history along its dark current. Beneath the bridge arches, traders and beggars spoke of the old days, of the monstrous king who defied the Pope, who took wives like trophies, who built an empire out of blood and fear. His story had become legend, half truth, half nightmare. But every legend leaves something behind. At Hampton Court, the air grew colder in winter than anywhere else in England. Guards, standing watch at night, sometimes swore they saw a shape move through the mist. A tall figure, cloaked in shadow, limping slightly, the faint clink of metal following each step. When they tried to look directly, there was nothing, only the echo of boots fading into silence, and a strange, heavy stillness that lingered until dawn. In the great chapel, where sunlight once danced through stained glass. The choir sang hymns that trembled with memory. They said the king's spirit came there often, not to pray, but to listen, to the sound of human voices, something he had lost in his final days when everyone spoke only in fear. The notes of the music rose, curled, and disappeared into the high arches, leaving behind the faint scent of smoke, or candle wax, or something else entirely, something that didn't belong to this world. As centuries passed, the world outside changed beyond recognition. Empires grew, revolutions burned, kings rose and fell, yet Henry remained. His face, painted, idealized, immortalized, still stared out from the museum walls, his eyes bright with impossible pride. Tourists walked past, unaware of the chill that seemed to follow them after they left his portrait. They would speak of it later, perhaps laughing, perhaps uneasy. That strange, heavy feeling, as if someone were watching them from just behind the glass. Scholars wrote his story over and over. Some called him a tyrant. Others called him a visionary. But between the lines of every account, a silence persisted. A question no historian could answer. What did he see in those final moments, when the crown slipped away and eternity began to whisper his name? No one knows. Some said he saw the faces of his wives, standing in a circle, not accusing him, not forgiving him, simply waiting. Others imagined he saw England itself, his greatest creation and his greatest curse, unfolding before him, endless and alive. Time turned again. The industrial age rose. The noise of machines filled the air where once there had been only the sound of horses and bells. London grew into a city of smoke and iron. Yet still his shadow remained. His name appeared in books, in speeches, in arguments about power and faith. He had become something larger than a man, a warning, perhaps, or a reflection of what men could become when they believed themselves gods. In the quiet corners of the old castles, caretakers spoke of strange things. Doors that closed without wind, mirrors that clouded over as if touched by unseen breath. The faint sound of a man muttering to himself, always in the same low rhythm, too distant to understand. They would find the air heavy, the candles flickering, and when they looked toward the corridor, there would be only emptiness. The historians came and went. The poets reimagined him. Painters added their colors, filmmakers their light. Yet the truth remained elusive, slipping through every hand that tried to hold it. For the truth about King Henry was not in the wars, nor the marriages, nor even the throne. It was in the silence that followed him, the vacuum he left behind. Even now, when the world has changed beyond his imagination, his name still holds power. When a monarch speaks with authority, when a leader defies the world, when a man believes he can rewrite destiny itself, the shadow of Henry flickers in the corner of the room. The same fire that once burned in his chest still burns somewhere in the hearts of those who come after. And still, the story continues. Somewhere in the heart of England, under the soil of forgotten abbeys, under the vaults of history, the pulse of his memory still beats. The wind moves through the ruins of his palaces, whispering in voices too faint to be understood. It carries with it fragments of the past, echoes of laughter, cries of pain, the sound of a door slamming shut centuries ago. The night deepens. The river glows faintly under the moonlight. The world sleeps, but his ghost does not. It walks the edges of dreams, a shadow among shadows, searching for the peace it never found in life. And so, the tale of King Henry goes on, through time, through memory, through the unending silence between heartbeats. History breathes his name in every century, and his story, like all stories of power, sin, and fear, has no ending. It only drifts onward, forever. Centuries have passed, yet his name has not grown quiet. It hums softly beneath the noise of the modern age, hidden in the murmurs of tourists, in the slow footsteps that echo across marble floors and stone courtyards. The world has changed beyond all recognition. Horses replaced by machines, letters by glowing screens, silence by the endless whisper of electricity. But even now, in the stillness after midnight, England remembers. Hampton Court still stands, proud and patient, its red brick walls darkened by centuries of rain. Visitors come in the daylight, laughing, taking photographs, tracing the lines of history with the tips of their fingers. Yet when the crowds are gone and the gates close, the air grows cold again. The great halls breathe. The tapestries move ever so slightly, though there is no wind. Guards say that in the hour before dawn, they sometimes hear music from a distant room, the faint, uneven notes of a lute, the kind that once played for a dying king. In one forgotten chamber, a chair sits beneath a tall window. No one remembers placing it there, and no one dares to move it. Some say it is for him, that even in death he demands a seat at the edge of his kingdom. Others say it's only furniture, a relic of time, yet none of them stay long enough to test the truth. The air there is too heavy, the silence too complete. The curators who tend the palace speak of odd occurrences. A door found open when it had been locked, a scent of smoke or lavender lingering in empty corridors. One woman, working late, claimed she saw a reflection in the window behind her. A man in dark velvet, broad-shouldered, his face half in shadow. When she turned, no one was there. Yet the impression of his breath remained on the glass for just a moment longer than it should have. In the great cathedrals where he once prayed, the light still falls in solemn colors through the stained glass. Tourists walk below without looking up, unaware of the names carved into the stone around them. But if you pause, if you listen long enough, the silence between footsteps begins to shift. The echo of a voice, deep, commanding, weary, seems to move through the vaulted air. It speaks no words, only a presence, a reminder of something once immense that time could not erase. In the museums, his portraits remain unchanged. The same eyes, the same impossible expression. Pride and exhaustion captured forever in oil and pigment. Generations have studied that gaze, wondering what he thought, what he feared, what he knew of himself in the end. And still, no one can decide whether they see a god or a man in those painted eyes. Sometimes, late at night, when the lights are dimmed and the galleries are empty, the watchmen swear the portrait seems to breathe. Not move, but breathe. The faintest expansion of the chest, the suggestion of life returning, only to fade again as if remembering it was no longer allowed. Beyond the walls of history, his story has become something else entirely. His name now exists in books, in classrooms, in whispered facts and half-remembered lessons. Students memorize his dates, his wives, his reforms, but not the weight of his solitude, not the slow unraveling of his body and his soul. The world remembers the power, but forgets the silence that came after. And perhaps that is how it must be, because every age needs its myths, and every myth hides a man. Even the air of modern London carries traces of him. In the fog that rolls off the river, in the low toll of the bells that mark the passing hours. His England has become something new, yet built upon his bones. The churches he created still stand, their spires cutting into the gray sky. The laws he signed still shape the country's pulse. His blood, scattered through centuries of heirs and histories, still flows quietly in veins that no longer remember his name. Sometimes people dream of him, not as a king, but as a shadow standing at the foot of their bed, watching silently, his face unreadable. The dream always feels the same, cold, heavy, endless. They wake with the sense of something vast pressing upon their chest, as if time itself had paused to look at them. And then it fades, leaving only the faint echo of a heartbeat that doesn't belong to them. The world forgets, but the earth remembers. Beneath the stones of Windsor, where his body lies, the air is thick and still. No light enters. The centuries above him have turned to dust, but the vault remains sealed. No sound disturbs that silence, and yet, there are moments when visitors to the chapel say they feel a vibration beneath their feet, faint and rhythmic, as though something deep below were breathing, slowly, patiently, endlessly. And so the story carries on. Through every age, every empire, every quiet hour before dawn. The tale of the king who would not rest, whose power became his prison, whose memory outlived his body. His shadow stretches across time itself, reaching from the 16th century into the modern world, touching every moment where pride and fear meet. Because stories like his do not end. They only shift, and echo, and repeat. The crown changes hands, the faces change, the world rebuilds itself, but the same silence waits at the end of every throne. There is a place between history and dream, where time folds upon itself like mist on still water. It is neither life nor death, but something vast and unmeasured, where the echoes of the past drift endlessly, weightless and without form. It is here that the shadow of King Henry walks. He moves through corridors that no longer exist, through stone that has long since crumbled into dust. The walls shimmer faintly, made not of matter but of memory, shaped by the thoughts of those who still whisper his name. Every footstep is both sound and silence, echoing through centuries that forgot how to count. Around him, the air hums with fragments of his own making, voices of his court, the cry of trumpets, the rustle of silks, the soft sobs of those who once feared and loved him. They rise and fade like waves against a shore that no longer knows the sea. Sometimes he pauses, as if to listen, and the noise of the world slips away. Only then does he feel the weight of eternity pressing gently against him, patient, watchful, endless. He remembers moments, but not in order. The sound of laughter beside a summer fountain, the thrill of victory, the sting of betrayal, the pale face of a wife he once adored, the cold eyes of another he condemned. They drift before him like dust caught in sunlight, beautiful, fleeting, gone. And in their place, the same question returns, was it worth it? There is no answer here. Only the soft movement of shadows, only the steady heartbeat of time itself, pulsing somewhere far beyond reach. In this strange half-world, even memory begins to lose its edges. The names blur, the faces fade. Yet his crown remains, a glimmering shape in the dark, untarnished, untouched. It hovers before him like a promise he can never fulfill. Sometimes other figures appear in the mist, other kings, other rulers who came after him. They do not speak, for speech is meaningless here. They simply pass by, their forms outlined in faint light, each carrying their own weight, their own regrets. They nod as they go, a silent acknowledgement between those who once believed themselves immortal. Then they fade again into the long gray hush. Above this realm, the world continues. Seasons turn, empires fall, new voices fill the silence. But down here, the echo of kings persists. It is not torment, nor peace, only the slow realization that greatness and ruin are the same thread woven through time. And Henry, ever restless, continues to follow it, tracing the line of his own legend as it winds through centuries, searching for its end and finding none. Sometimes he feels the pull of the living world. A whisper in a museum, a dream in a stranger's sleep, a fleeting shiver when someone speaks his name aloud. He turns toward the sound, but it always fades, slipping through the fingers of eternity like smoke. He is both remembered and forgotten, both ghost and idea. He has become what every king becomes in time. Not a man, not a myth, but a lesson. The story of ambition that devoured itself, of pride that could not rest. He sees now what he never could in life, that history remembers not love or hate, but the shape of consequence. Every action, every word, still ripples outward through ages he can no longer touch. The mist around him thickens. He walks, though there is nowhere to go. The crown glows faintly above him, casting light that does not warm. His reflection flickers on invisible walls. 1,000 versions of himself, young and strong, old and broken, crowned and condemned. Each stares back in silence, as if waiting for him to understand something he has not yet learned. The mist deepens, thick as breath, curling through the hollow corridors of forever. Somewhere within that endless gray, he feels them. Faint at first, like ripples across still water. Presences long familiar yet long gone. They draw nearer, quiet, weightless, neither forgiving nor vengeful. And moves first, her figure forming from the fog like smoke made human. Her face is calm now, untouched by fear, her eyes holding a sadness that has forgotten pain. She says nothing. She does not need to. Her silence speaks of towers, of blades, of the sound of a crowd holding its breath. Henry looks upon her and cannot turn away. He remembers the sound of her laughter once, the way she spoke his name as if it were both prayer and curse. That sound has not existed for centuries, and yet it lingers between them, fragile as candlelight. Catherine follows, young, terrified, radiant in her sorrow. Behind her, Jane, pale and still, carrying the faint scent of lilies, the one who gave him the son he so desperately wanted and paid for it with her life. Then the others, Catherine of Aragon, steadfast and weary, and of Cleves, who outlived them all, and Catherine Parr, who prayed even for his soul. They circle him in the mist, 6 fragments of a life built on power and undone by its hunger. They do not accuse him. They do not absolve him. They simply are part of him as he was part of them. The echo of his name moves through them all like wind through leaves. For a long while, there is no movement, only the quiet hum of time remembering itself. Then, faintly, another light appears, small, distant, golden. It flickers as though carried by unseen hands. He turns toward it, drawn by a feeling he no longer understands. From that light steps a child, a boy with eyes too old for his years. Edward, pale and fragile as the winter dawn. He gazes at his father not with fear, but with a kind of wondering pity. Behind him come Mary, solemn and proud, and Elizabeth, the flame that refused to die. They form a line before him, each a mirror of what he gave and what he took. The dynasty he dreamed of stands at last together, united not in blood, but in silence. He looks at them, and for the first time since death claimed him, he feels the ache of something close to regret. Not sharp, not unbearable, but deep, endless, human. The fog trembles. The world shifts. He sees them fade, not vanish, but pass through him, returning to the long tide of history where all souls eventually drift. Their light remains, faint as dawn seen through heavy clouds. He is alone again. Yet this solitude is different, softer, quieter, as if the weight he carried has begun, at last, to dissolve into the stillness. Above, the centuries keep moving. The world of men builds and destroys itself again and again. New kings wear crowns they did not forge. New empires rise upon the bones of the old. The names change, the languages shift, but the rhythm remains the same. Ambition, glory, ruin, silence. In dreams, he begins to hear them all, the voices of those yet to come, repeating patterns older than memory. He hears the sound of marching boots, the cry of revolutions, the cold hum of machines that mimic human thought. He does not understand these things, but he knows them. They are the continuation of what he began, the endless reach of power, the endless price it demands. And through it all, the same question echoes. Was it worth it? No answer comes. Only the soft murmur of time, flowing onward like a river that never ends. Henry turns again, walking through the mist. His form grows thinner, his edges faint. The crown still follows him, glimmering like a dying star, bound to him as shadow to flame. He cannot remove it, cannot escape it, but perhaps, somewhere beyond this gray horizon, he will learn to bear its weight without pain. The mist settles, the echoes fade, and in the stillness, only the crown remains, no longer gold, no longer weight, but memory. A symbol not of glory, but of the cost of it. King Henry is gone, his body long turned to dust, his kingdom transformed beyond recognition. Yet somehow his shadow lingers, not in the stones of his palaces, nor the pages of his chronicles, but in the quiet pulse of human ambition itself. He was not the first to fall to it, and he would not be the last. For the hunger that drove him, the need to command, to shape the world in his image, is the same hunger that built empires, burned cities, and still whispers in the heart of every age. History remembers him not for peace, nor wisdom, but for the weight of his choices, the lives they changed, the hearts they broke, the world they left behind. He sought eternity, and in a way he found it, but not as he dreamed. Now, centuries later, his name survives not in the roar of power, but in the hush of reflection, spoken softly, like a warning carried by the wind. And so the story ends where all stories of kings must end, not in triumph, not in terror, but in silence. For in the end, even the mightiest crown must bow to the quiet hand of time.